You ever just decide you're done with life? That the horrors of going outside every morning and driving to your respective school/workplace is too much of a bother? The humdrum daily life of normal cog turning in the clock of society just doesn't appeal to you anymore, does it? I can sympathize. Luckily, I have the best thing ever for you. Visual novels. More specifically, a visual novel going by the name of Nausea. Nausea is a VN that your parents would be horrified to find on your hard drive. Unlike most VNs, this one would probably warrant a trip to the psych ward and a talk with the local priest. Of course, what can you expect from something being squeezed out of the gray matter of a Mr. Gen Urobuchi, whom you may know as the writer of such shows as Psycho Pass, Puella Magi Madoka Magica, and the first episode of All No Zero. If you're familiar with the Urobucher, then you will probably be able to tell right off the bat that this isn't your run-of-the-mill visual novel. And if you aren't familiar with the Urobucher, then you will probably be able to tell right off the bat this isn't your run-of-the-mill visual novel from its opening screen being a compilation of bulbous gore and blood. Obviously you won't be flicking your wick to this one. At least not yet. Nausea is about Saya no Kyuta and our Blantag exploring the inner reaches of Blantag's apartment and psyche after a tragic accident leaves him with a sensory change that has transformed everything normal and nice and pretty into horrifying blob monsters made of rotting meat. Of course, our Blantag is distraught by this, to the point that he contemplates offing himself. That is until he meets Saya, the only being seemingly unaffected by this sensory change, as she's more akin to an underage girl than the content of a butcher's trash can. Of course, considering that she's the only thing the protag sees as still appealing, this leads to way more sex scenes than the story should really allow. I mean, way more than it should even consider. It's pretty gross when you consider that to the protag, he's screwing a lolly on a collective blob of leaking, pulsating meat, and not a bed. The VN teeters on the line between horror and straight-up hentai, but it likes to lean towards the horror aspect a lot more, which I can respect considering that if this 6-hour experience was just watching our protagonist dump all of the life juice he had left in him into this frail creature, I wouldn't exactly be talking about this in a video now, would I? The VN loves to show the surrounding characters' reaction to Protag-kun's kookiness, as he has come back to the conclusion that if they were to try to explain a situation, he would either be sent to the hospital or into a mental institution. This entails showing a former love interest of his and his best friend being visibly shaken by his sudden standoffishness, as the protagonist now sees his friends as large masses of gore speaking through a filter that only a Marilyn Manson could love. And there's no way you could ever become attached to a mass of miscellaneous meat parts, even if you see them as a super cute girl, and they still sound like a super cute girl, right? Right? However, it also loves to return to Saya and the protag fucking because, well, I guess there's not much else to do when you're suffering from a chronic case of meat vision. And lest we forget the few times that outside influences were brought into the picture, which totally weren't at all unnecessary or unwarranted or awful in any way. Honest. Also, around the halfway mark, it shoves a choice in your face that if you just happen to choose to go through with something, the game suddenly ends and Protag-kun is thrown in mental ward. So that's weird. Then again, the choice to make it happen is so out there that I'm sure most people didn't even give it a second thought and went with the decision that increases the VN's length by at least 3 hours. But despite those few things, this is a solid piece of work for one reason, and one reason only. Urobuchi did it again. That awful combination of awful things that always makes his work a cut above the rest. He made me care for an abomination, and he decided to make this story a tearjerker. You will probably cry, especially if you start to like Saya as a character. Or if you liked Protag-kun. Or any of his friends. You know what? Let's just go ahead and get this out of the way and say everyone gets fucked in this one. And not in the way you would expect from a visual novel. And that's why I really have to recommend this one, because if I don't, I might end up in a horrific accident myself and have to suffer through a life of meat vision, because that's how karma works. And that's justice. That's justice, man.